What if everything you thought you knew about where we came from was only half the story? Tonight, we're taking you deep into the shadows of history, where ancient whispers and hidden scrolls reveal a version of humanity's beginning most were never meant to hear. In this medieval time sleep story, you'll uncover forbidden secrets, mysterious biblical clues, and the shocking possibility that Adam and Eve weren't the only ones in the garden after all. It's a tale woven with lost civilizations, divine mysteries, and the human search for purpose, a perfect mix of curiosity and calm for your night's rest. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's journey into the forbidden history that just might change how you see humanity's past forever. 1. Two creations, one story, what Genesis really tells us. Most people know the opening of the Bible, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." It's one of the most famous lines in all of literature. But what many don't realize is that the book of Genesis doesn't give us just one creation story. It actually gives us two. And these two stories are not duplicates of each other, like someone accidentally repeated the same event twice. No, they tell two different perspectives, two lenses on how humanity came to be. The first account, found in Genesis chapter 1, is big and cosmic. It's widescreen, cinematic in scope. Imagine watching the earth form out of swirling chaos, sea separating from sky, and then life bursting forth across land and water. In this story, God creates humanity, male and female, together. The language is grand, almost poetic. Let us make mankind in our image, after our likeness. This is about humanity as a whole. Male and female are created side by side, both equally carrying the image of God, both given the task to fill the earth and subdue it and to steward creation. It's humanity seen from a satellite view, if you will, a wide-angle perspective of who we are and why we matter. But then something interesting happens in Genesis chapter 2. The camera zooms in. It's no longer the universe-wide view of everything at once. Instead, we're standing in a garden, a sacred space called Eden. And there is one man, Adam. He's not presented as just another farmer or gardener. He's different. He's chosen. He's placed in the garden not merely to tend plants but to serve as a kind of priest. The Hebrew words used, to work it and to keep it, aren't just farming terms. They're the same verbs used later in Scripture to describe the work of priests in the temple, those who guard holy space and perform acts of worship. So why two stories? Are they contradicting each other? Not really. Genesis chapter 1 is about humanity in general, men and women created with dignity and value, tasked with caring for creation. Genesis chapter 2, on the other hand, focuses on one individual, Adam, given a unique role in a specific sacred place. It's as if the Bible is saying, here's the big story of everyone. And now, let's zoom in on one man who will play a key role in the next chapter of human history. And this changes how we see Adam. He's not just the first man in the biological sense, like a caveman who happened to stand upright first. He's portrayed as something more like a representative, someone chosen to stand between heaven and earth, to experience the presence of God directly in a temple-like garden. Eden itself reads more like a temple than just a patch of trees. The imagery of rivers flowing out, of precious stones, of God walking in the garden, it all echoes the later descriptions of Israel's tabernacle and temple, where God's presence dwells and priests serve. Adam's calling was deeply spiritual, deeply relational. But that calling also came with responsibility. Adam was given commands, to work, to guard, and to obey. His life was about more than survival, it was about partnership with the divine. And that's what makes Genesis so fascinating. It's not just telling us a story about ancient people with fig leaves and talking serpents. It's painting a bigger picture. Humanity has a purpose, and within humanity, some are called to play key roles that affect everyone else. When you see it this way, the two creation stories are not in conflict but are actually complementary. Genesis chapter 1 sets the stage, humans as image bearers, valuable and powerful, designed to live in harmony with God and creation. Genesis chapter 2 gives us a character study, one man, Adam, placed in sacred space with sacred duty. One is about humanity in general, the other is about a mission given to a specific person. And that raises questions, doesn't it? What does it mean to bear the image of God? Is it simply about being human, or is there something about representing God, as Adam did, that still echoes in us today? Are we all, in some sense, still called to be priests, caretakers of creation, people who stand between heaven and earth. These 2 chapters are ancient, yes, but they still speak today. They remind us that we are not accidents of history or random products of chance. We are image bearers with value, with purpose. And some of us, in different times and places, are invited into roles bigger than ourselves, roles that connect us to something holy, something eternal. 2. The garden's echo in our modern world. When we read about Eden and Adam's role as a priestly figure, it might feel like an ancient legend tucked away in the dusty pages of history. But the truth is, that story has never really left us. It lingers in our collective memory, like an echo we can't quite silence. Even today, in our world of instant information and dizzying technological progress, we still wrestle with the same questions Adam faced in that garden. Why are we here? What is the point of all this? And who, or what, has the final say over our lives? If you strip away the modern layers, cell phones, skyscrapers, AI, space exploration, you find that humanity hasn't changed all that much. We still look for meaning beyond ourselves. We still long for something transcendent, something bigger than what we can touch or measure. Call it God, call it purpose, call it destiny, whatever name we choose, the longing is there. And that longing, whether we realize it or not, is the same longing that beats at the heart of the Eden story. In the garden, Adam faced a choice. It wasn't just about whether to eat fruit from a tree, it was about who he would trust for wisdom and direction. Would he live in humble submission to the Creator, walking in harmony with divine order? Or would he take control, define good and evil on his own terms, and choose self-rule? That same choice plays out every day in our modern lives. Only now it looks a little different. It's not a tree and a serpent, it's the temptation to say, I don't need anyone to tell me what's right or wrong. I can figure it out myself. For some, that's a badge of honor. Autonomy is one of our highest values. We celebrate independence, individuality, and personal freedom. And to be fair, there's beauty in that. Humans were created to think, to dream, to build, to innovate. But with that freedom comes the same risk Adam faced. What happens when our self-rule goes too far? What happens when we trust ourselves so completely that we forget our limits? We see it in how we approach technology. We create machines that think, tools that can alter life itself, systems that connect the globe in seconds. These things are incredible achievements, things Adam could never have imagined. But they also raise questions. Just because we can do something, should we? Is every kind of progress actually good for us? Are we reaching for knowledge that we're not ready to handle, just like Adam reaching for that forbidden fruit? This is where Eden's echo gets loud. Humanity still faces that garden choice, every single day. Will we trust in something greater, something outside ourselves, or will we double down on self-rule, determined to be our own gods? The story frames it as obedience versus autonomy, but it's more than just a religious question. It's a human question, one that plays out in boardrooms, in relationships, in science labs, and in quiet moments alone when we wonder, am I on the right path? Interestingly, modern psychology and sociology often confirm what those ancient texts were hinting at all along. People need purpose. We need meaning that stretches beyond ourselves, otherwise we break down. Anxiety, depression, addiction, so many modern struggles are tied to that hollow feeling of what am I even doing here? It's as if losing sight of Eden, that place of connection, identity, and purpose, still haunts us. We've built bigger cities, faster machines, and even virtual realities, but the core questions remain unsolved. And maybe that's because Eden wasn't just a location, it was a state of being. A life where everything was rightly ordered, humanity walking with God, humanity working with meaning, humanity resting in identity instead of constantly striving to prove its worth. When Adam's choice disrupted that order, the ripple effects didn't just hit him, they hit all of us. And even now, thousands of years later, we're still trying to find our way back, through religion, through science, through philosophy, through personal development. But here's the thing, Eden's story isn't told to shame humanity. It's not just about our fall, it's also about an invitation. The Bible's narrative doesn't stop with Adam's mistake, it keeps moving, pointing toward restoration, toward a time when humanity can once again walk in harmony with its Creator. And this is where the modern relevance becomes crystal clear. Because if the story ended in Genesis 3, we'd just shrug and say, Well, humanity blew it. But it doesn't end there. Instead, it asks us to make the same choice Adam faced, but with a different outcome. What will we choose? Will we keep grabbing for control, hoping that this time it will finally make us feel secure, happy, and whole? Or will we do the harder thing? Trust something greater than ourselves, admit that we don't have it all figured out, and seek connection instead of control? These aren't ancient questions. They're today's questions, framed in the glow of computer screens and whispered in late-night thoughts when we can't sleep. And maybe that's why this story still matters, even now. It's not just a myth from a faraway time, it's our story. Every one of us stands at the crossroads between obedience and autonomy, between trust and self-rule. Eden is not behind us as much as it is around us, reflected in every choice we make, every time we ask what kind of person we want to become. So as we look at our modern world, with its incredible progress and its equally incredible anxieties, maybe the story of Eden isn't so far away after all. Maybe it's still calling to us, reminding us of who we were meant to be and inviting us into something deeper, something transcendent, something that finally makes all of this make sense. 3. The first Adam and the last Adam. When we left the Garden of Eden, humanity's story had already changed forever. Adam, who had been placed in a sacred space with a sacred purpose, failed in his calling. His choice to seize control rather than trust in divine wisdom disrupted the harmony between heaven and earth. The garden was lost, and humanity was sent out into a world now marked by toil, pain, and separation from the very source of life. But even then, the story wasn't over. In fact, some would say it had just begun. Because woven into that moment of failure was a thread of hope, hope that one day, what was lost could be restored. And that brings us to one of the most intriguing connections in the Bible, the link between Adam, the first representative of humanity, and Jesus, often called the last Adam. Why call Jesus the last Adam? On the surface, they seem nothing alike. Adam lived in a garden of abundance. Jesus lived under Roman occupation in a world of poverty and pain. Adam reached for forbidden fruit, Jesus spent 40 days hungry in a desert and still chose obedience. Adam's choice fractured creation, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection became the hinge on which restoration swings open. Think of Adam as humanity's first covenant representative, the one who stood on behalf of all people. When Adam failed, he didn't just fail for himself, he failed for everyone he represented. The separation from God that began in the garden became humanity's shared inheritance. That broken relationship echoed across generations, people striving to find meaning, building temples and altars, developing laws and rituals, all in an effort to bridge that gap. And yet, no matter how hard people tried, the garden gates stayed closed. Enter Jesus. The New Testament calls him the last Adam because he steps into that representative role again. But this time, he succeeds where the first Adam failed. Instead of choosing autonomy, Jesus chooses obedience all the way to the cross. Where Adam's disobedience brought death, Jesus' obedience brings life. He doesn't just repair one man's mistake, he changes the trajectory for all who will follow him. This is why, in the Gospel stories, Jesus often speaks about the kingdom of God, about renewal, about life and abundance. His miracles, healing the sick, calming storms, feeding the hungry, aren't just random acts of kindness. They are glimpses of Eden restored, snapshots of what life looks like when heaven and earth are in harmony again. It's as if he's saying, remember what was lost? Watch this. I'm bringing it back. And then there's the imagery of the tree. In Eden, the tree of life was at the center, but it became inaccessible after Adam's fall. In Revelation, the Bible's final vision, we see that tree again, thriving in a renewed world, with open access for everyone. The way back to that tree, that symbol of eternal life, runs straight through Jesus. His own death on a wooden cross, a kind of tree, becomes the way that life flows back into a broken world. This is why early Christians were so bold in their claims about Jesus. They weren't just saying he was a good teacher or a prophet. They were saying he was undoing the curse of Eden. Paul, one of the earliest Christian writers, put it bluntly, for as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. One man's failure had global consequences, but one man's obedience had even greater ones. But what does that mean for us, living centuries later in a world filled with noise, technology, and competing beliefs? It means that the same separation Adam experienced doesn't have to define our lives. The longing we feel, the ache for purpose, for connection, for something beyond ourselves, finds its answer not in another self-help method or technological breakthrough, but in the person of Jesus, the last Adam. He embodies what humanity was always meant to be, fully connected to God, fully alive, fully at peace. This isn't just theology, it's deeply personal. Because when you look at Jesus' life, you see someone who understands human struggle. He faced temptation just like Adam, but instead of choosing self-rule, he chose trust. He faced suffering, betrayal, and even death, yet responded with forgiveness and love. And because of that, he opens a door that had been closed since Eden. And here's the beautiful part, this restored relationship isn't limited to ancient figures in sacred texts. It's an invitation for every person, everywhere, right now. Whether you're skeptical or searching, whether your life feels put together or completely broken, the story of the first Adam and the last Adam is really about you. It's about your place in the grand narrative, your chance to step out of isolation and into connection, your opportunity to find life in its fullest sense. Some might say, that sounds too big, too cosmic for me. But that's exactly the point. The Bible has always told a cosmic story, a story that began with the universe being formed, with humanity being given purpose, and with a garden meant to be a home for heaven and earth together. Adam's failure made that home feel like a distant dream, but Jesus' victory promises it can become reality again. And not just someday, far away, but starting now, in hearts, in communities, in small acts of trust and obedience. The first Adam closed the way to the tree of life, the last Adam opened it. The first Adam brought separation, the last Adam brings connection. The first Adam left us outside the garden, the last Adam invites us back in, not as guests but as family. So when we look at our modern questions, why are we here? What's the point? Where do we find hope? The story of Adam and Jesus gives an answer. You are here because you are loved, because you were made for connection, because there is a path back to what was lost. And that path isn't about doing enough or knowing enough, it's about following the one who already succeeded where humanity once failed. 4. Adam's priesthood in the garden as a cosmic temple. When people picture the Garden of Eden, they often imagine a paradise of trees, flowers, and sparkling rivers, a kind of untouched wilderness. But the ancient Hebrew imagination painted a deeper, more sacred picture. Eden wasn't just a beautiful park, it was a temple. A cosmic temple where heaven and earth met, where God's presence dwelled in harmony with His creation. And at the heart of this sacred space stood Adam, not simply as a gardener, but as the first priest. The language in Genesis gives this away. When Adam is placed in Eden, the words used to describe his work are unusual: to serve, avad, and to keep, shamar. These words aren't primarily about farming, they are used later in the Hebrew scriptures to describe what priests do in the tabernacle and temple. Priests serve by performing acts of worship and sacrifice, and they keep by guarding the holy space from impurity and chaos. In other words, Adam's role was sacred from the very beginning. Imagine Eden not just as a garden but as a sanctuary, its beauty reflecting divine order. The rivers flowing out from Eden, the precious stones mentioned in its description, even the tree of life at its center, all carry temple-like symbolism. It was here, in this holy environment, that Adam was given his calling, to protect sacred space, to preserve its holiness, and to live in continual relationship with the Creator. His work was not simply about cultivating the ground but about cultivating a life of worship and obedience. This makes Adam's failure more than just a bad choice about fruit, it was a failure of priestly responsibility. Priests are supposed to guard the temple, to keep it safe from anything unholy. Yet when the serpent came, Adam did nothing. He did not guard the sacred space, he allowed deception to enter unchallenged. In a way, his silence spoke louder than words. He abdicated his role as priest and protector. The consequences of that failure rippled outward. Eden, as the meeting place of heaven and earth, became closed off. Humanity, once designed to live in intimacy with God, now lived at a distance. Work became toil, relationships became strained, and life itself became a struggle for survival. The priesthood that Adam had embodied, his unique role as one who serves and guards, was broken, and humanity was left searching for what had been lost. Interestingly, the Bible doesn't abandon this idea of humanity as priests. In later centuries, Israel's priests would wear garments echoing the beauty of Eden, minister in tabernacles decorated with garden imagery, and perform rituals meant to symbolically restore access to God's presence. Every sacrifice, every act of worship, was like a small attempt to undo Adam's failure, to re-establish what was lost when Eden closed its gates. But even that was temporary. The tabernacle and temple gave glimpses of God's presence, but not the full intimacy humanity once enjoyed. That's why the Bible keeps pointing forward, to a day when the priesthood would be restored, when someone would succeed where Adam failed, and when heaven and earth would be reunited. This is why the role of Jesus as both priest and temple becomes so powerful later in the story. He doesn't just visit holy space, he is holy space, God dwelling with humanity. And when he dies and rises, the symbolism is unmistakable. The temple curtain tears, signifying restored access to God's presence. But even before Jesus, the Eden story invites us to see our own lives differently. What if we, too, are called to a priestly role? What if being human means more than just surviving or succeeding in a career? What if it means serving, guarding, and cultivating sacredness in our own spaces, our homes, our relationships, our work? The echo of Adam's calling suggests that every person has a responsibility not only to manage physical creation but also to protect spiritual space, to push back against chaos and preserve what is good and pure. Of course, we wrestle with this. Like Adam, we often fail to guard our hearts, our communities, our sacred trust. We allow bitterness, fear, or selfishness to creep in, and suddenly the spaces meant for beauty and peace feel fractured. But if Adam's story teaches us anything, it's that failure doesn't end the story. The Bible continues because restoration is possible. And that restoration begins when we recover the idea that our lives have sacred purpose. Eden may feel far away, but the calling of humanity to serve and guard still stands. Each act of kindness, each moment of integrity, each time we choose love over indifference, it's like a small glimpse of Eden restored. We may not stand in a literal garden temple, but the invitation to live with God, to protect what is holy, and to partner in His work remains open. Adam's priesthood reminds us that our humanity was never meant to be ordinary. It was meant to be holy. We were created to stand at the intersection of heaven and earth, reflecting God's image, and participating in His work of caring for the world. Losing sight of that calling leads to chaos, but remembering it leads to life. So perhaps the story of Eden isn't just about what was lost, it's also about what can be regained. Because if one man's failure could close the door, another man's obedience could open it again. And if that's true, then even now, even in the complexity of modern life, the sacred calling of humanity is still alive. We are still invited to serve, to guard, and to live as priests in the world we inhabit. 5. Challenging the traditional story of human origins. For centuries, many people have read the story of Adam and Eve as a simple and complete account of humanity's beginning. Two people, one garden, one mistake that changed everything. For many, that's where the story starts and ends. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if the Bible's account was never meant to be a flat, one-dimensional timeline but instead a window into something deeper, something mysterious, something bigger than we imagined? It's a bold question, one that can feel unsettling. We like clear beginnings. We like to know who was first, where we came from, and how it all fits neatly into place. Yet, when we read the Bible closely, strange hints emerge, hints that suggest Adam and Eve might not have been the only humans alive at the time, or at least that their story is not about biology alone but about something more profound: covenant, calling, and spiritual representation. Take the story of Cain, Adam and Eve's son. After killing his brother Abel, Cain fears being driven away from his family because, he says, "Whoever finds me will kill me." But who exactly is Cain afraid of? If Adam, Eve, and their children were the only people on earth, why would Cain worry about strangers seeking revenge? Later, Cain takes a wife and builds a city. A city, not just a tent, not just a hut, but a settlement, a community that suggests the existence of more people than just Adam's direct descendants. These details often get glossed over, yet they raise fascinating possibilities. Could there have been other human populations existing alongside Adam's family? Was Adam's role unique not because he was the first biological human but because he was chosen for a unique relationship with God, A covenant relationship intended to represent all humanity? In other words, was Adam not just the first man but the first priest, the first human given a sacred vocation to walk with God in a specific way? Some scholars point out that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 might actually describe two distinct events. Genesis 1 describes the creation of humanity in general, male and female he created them, a picture of humankind as a whole. Genesis 2 then zooms in on one individual, Adam, who is placed in a unique garden temple environment. In that reading, Adam is not just one of many humans but the one called to be the mediator between God and his creation, the one whose failure would impact everyone else. And it's not just biblical scholars asking these questions. Modern discoveries in archaeology and genetics have revealed a human story far more complex than we once thought. Evidence of ancient civilizations like Göbekli Tepe suggests that humans were building sophisticated temples and practicing advanced rituals thousands of years before what we often imagine as the dawn of civilization. Genetics tells us that humanity comes from a broad population, not just a single couple. These scientific insights don't necessarily erase the spiritual truths of Genesis, but they do invite us to read the story differently. Maybe the Bible isn't giving us a play-by-play history lesson about the very first humans. Maybe it's doing something even more profound, showing us how God entered into relationship with humanity, starting with one person chosen as a representative. In that sense, Adam becomes less about biology and more about theology. He is the first man in the sense of being the first covenant partner, the one called to embody humanity's purpose. And when Adam fails, it's not just his family that suffers, it's all of humanity. This perspective doesn't make the story smaller, it makes it bigger. Instead of focusing only on two individuals, it opens the door to see how God's purposes might have included a broader human family from the start. Adam's story becomes symbolic of all of us, people given purpose, people given sacred space, people who, like Adam, face the same choice between trusting God or trying to rule life on our own terms. And there's something humbling about that. Because if Adam was chosen out of many, it means God's relationship with humanity is not about exclusivity but about calling. It means that from the beginning, humanity was diverse, creative, and widespread, yet still united by a shared destiny, to reflect God's image and steward His creation. Of course, this raises questions that can feel uncomfortable. If there were others outside the garden, what was their relationship to God? Did they have their own sacred spaces, their own callings? Or was Adam's story meant to draw all of them, and eventually all of us, into one great story of redemption? We may never have full answers. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Genesis invites us not to close the book with easy answers but to open our minds to mystery, to see that God's work in the world has always been bigger than we imagined. Even today, we still wrestle with those same questions of identity and origin. Are we simply advanced animals, or are we sacred beings with purpose? Are we defined by our biology, or by something deeper, something divine? And if humanity began as more than just survival, if it began as a calling, what does that mean for how we live now? The story of Adam and Eve may not tell us every scientific detail about how humans populated the earth, but it tells us something perhaps even more important, that God seeks relationship with humanity, that we are invited into a divine mission, and that our choices still matter. Whether Adam was the only human or the chosen representative among many, his story reflects our own. Like him, we stand at the threshold of trust and autonomy, of life with God or a life on our own terms. So perhaps the real question isn't were Adam and Eve the only humans? But what does it mean to be human at all? And that's a question as relevant today as it was at the dawn of history. 6. Evidence of others beyond the garden. One of the most fascinating and puzzling details in the early chapters of Genesis comes not from Adam or Eve, but from their son, Cain. After his tragic choice to kill his brother Abel, Cain is confronted by God and sent away as a wanderer. And Cain's reaction is surprising. He is terrified, not of being alone, but of being killed by others. He says, "Whoever finds me will kill me." Who is Cain talking about? If we stick to a rigid reading of Genesis, where only Adam, Eve, and their children exist, Cain's fear seems misplaced. There shouldn't have been anyone else out there to harm him. And yet, Cain speaks as though the world beyond his family is already populated. Soon after, we see Cain taking a wife and building a city, an entire city, not just a solitary dwelling. Cities are built for communities, not for a single family unit. These small but significant details have intrigued theologians, historians, and ordinary readers for centuries. They hint at something bigger, something beyond the edges of Eden's story. Perhaps Adam and Eve were not the only humans alive at the time. Maybe there were already other groups of people, other communities outside the garden, living their own lives while Adam was uniquely chosen to inhabit a sacred space and carry a sacred calling. This idea changes how we think about Adam's role. If other people already existed, then Adam is not necessarily the first human in a purely biological sense. Instead, he becomes something even more profound, the first covenant representative of humanity, chosen to walk with God in a unique relationship. In other words, Adam's story isn't simply about who existed first, it's about who was chosen to stand at the intersection of heaven and earth. This concept fits surprisingly well with what we now know about humanity's history. Science shows us that humans didn't begin from a single isolated couple but from a broader population that existed tens of thousands of years ago. DNA studies confirm that humanity's genetic diversity points to many ancestors, not just two. Archaeological evidence, like the ancient structures at Göbekli Tepe, tells us that advanced human communities existed earlier than we once thought possible. These people built temples, developed rituals, and engaged in cultural life far more complex than the stereotypes of primitive first humans. When we put these scientific insights alongside Genesis, something fascinating happens. The Bible's story doesn't necessarily conflict with human history, it frames it differently. Instead of giving us a biology textbook, Genesis gives us a theological origin story. It's about God entering history to form a special relationship, beginning with Adam, and extending to all humanity. And it makes sense when you think about how ancient people told stories. They weren't writing for modern readers obsessed with scientific details. They were telling sacred stories meant to explain purpose and meaning. Adam is not simply the first man who ever lived, he is the first man called to live in direct covenant with God, placed in a temple-like garden, given priestly duties, and entrusted with guarding holy space. When he failed, the impact wasn't just on him or his family, it was cosmic. Cain's fear, then, is no mistake in the text, it's a clue. It suggests a world already populated, a world already complex, into which God introduces a unique calling and purpose. Cain's exile sends him into this broader human world, where his life continues, where he builds a city, where culture expands. Humanity's story continues to branch out, but always with Eden at its spiritual center, a place now lost, yet still shaping the imagination of generations to come. This idea has profound implications for how we read the Bible today. It reminds us that Scripture is less concerned with the biological question of who came first, and more concerned with the relational question of who is called. Adam's life is not about being first in time but first in purpose, first in covenant. His story is humanity's story concentrated into one life, chosen for intimacy with God, entrusted with sacred responsibilities, and given freedom that could either bless the world or break it apart. And isn't that still true today? We still live with that tension between calling and freedom, between responsibility and rebellion. We still live in a world filled with others, people different from us, people outside our immediate garden. Just as Adam and Cain stepped into a broader, populated world, so do we step into one shaped by countless other lives, each carrying their own history and potential. The presence of other people outside Eden also helps explain why the Bible quickly shifts into stories about cities, cultures, and nations. Humanity doesn't slowly populate the world starting from one isolated couple. Instead, the world is already buzzing with life, with Adam's family playing a unique role in the spiritual drama. This perspective doesn't diminish the Bible's importance, it enriches it. It shows how Genesis speaks less about biological origins and more about divine purpose and spiritual history. Of course, not everyone is comfortable with this interpretation. For some, Adam and Eve as the only humans is foundational, a matter of faith. But asking these questions doesn't have to undermine faith. In fact, it can deepen it. It invites us to see Scripture as a multi-layered story, one that speaks to both the ancient world and the modern one. It invites us to hold the mystery, acknowledging that there is more to humanity's beginning than we might have thought, yet still affirming that our deepest identity comes from the same place Adam's did, a calling from God to reflect His image and walk with Him. In the end, Cain's fear, his wife, his city, They all point us beyond a simplistic reading of Genesis. They whisper of a larger world, a broader humanity, and a deeper story, one where Adam is not just the start of biological life but the beginning of spiritual life, where the covenant between God and humanity first takes shape. And that story, far from being ancient and distant, is still unfolding today. 7. Theological and personal meaning, an invitation for everyone. If we step back from the details of Eden, Cain, and the wider human world, a bigger question emerges: why does this story still matter? After all, it's ancient history, or is it? The truth is, the story of Adam and the Garden of Eden was never just about the past. It's about us. It's about you, me, and everyone who has ever wondered why we're here and what we're meant to do. The Bible paints humanity as carrying something unique, the image of God. That idea might feel abstract, but it's one of the most powerful concepts in all of history. It means every person, no matter their origin, culture, language, or status, carries divine value. It means that we are more than biology, more than a collection of cells shaped by evolution and time. We are image bearers, designed with purpose, built to reflect something eternal and beautiful. In the story of Adam, that image bearing took the shape of a mission: to care for creation, to cultivate life, and to walk in harmony with God. Adam's failure didn't erase that mission, it simply exposed how fragile we are when we try to do it alone. But even after Eden closed its gates, that original calling never disappeared. Humanity still feels it. We see it in our yearning for justice, in our creativity, in our deep desire to belong to something bigger than ourselves. This is why the story is both theological and deeply personal. Theologically, it reveals God's intention for humanity: to live as His partners, to bring order where there is chaos, to protect what is sacred, and to reflect His love into the world. Personally, it invites every individual to step into that same calling. No one is disqualified by where they were born, who their ancestors were, or what mistakes they've made. The Bible's insistence that everyone carries God's image is a radical statement, especially in a world that often divides people by race, class, or ideology. Think about how different life looks when you see yourself and others through that lens. The person you pass on the street isn't just another stranger, they're an image bearer. The co-worker who annoys you, the family member you don't get along with, even people you disagree with politically or culturally, every single one of them carries divine worth. And so do you. That means your life has meaning, not because of your accomplishments or possessions, but because of who you are at your core, a person invited into a divine mission. This mission isn't about perfection, it's about participation. Adam was invited into a story bigger than himself, a story about restoring harmony between heaven and earth. That same invitation is still extended today. Whether you're a teacher, a nurse, a mechanic, or an artist, your work can reflect God's image when it is rooted in love, creativity, and care. You don't need to wear priestly garments or live in a sacred garden. The sacredness of your calling is found in how you live and love right where you are. And here's the beautiful part: the story doesn't leave us to figure this out alone. Where Adam failed, Jesus stepped in as the last Adam, showing us what it looks like to fully live in relationship with God. His life and teachings reveal what it means to bear God's image perfectly, showing mercy, seeking justice, forgiving enemies, and bringing hope to those who feel lost. Through him, the invitation to join God's mission isn't just symbolic, it becomes real and personal. That's why the story of Eden isn't locked in ancient history. It lives on in the choices we make every day. Will we embrace our calling, or will we, like Adam, choose autonomy and control? Will we see others as image bearers, or reduce them to labels and stereotypes? Will we use our creativity and influence to heal, or to harm? The story also speaks powerfully into modern struggles. In a world divided by culture, religion, and politics, the idea that every human being carries God's image offers a foundation for unity and dignity. It reminds us that no one is beyond reach, no one is irrelevant, and no one is excluded from God's invitation. Whether your ancestry traces back to kings or to unknown laborers, whether you feel proud of your life or weighed down by regret, the story of Adam tells you something essential: you are called. Some people read Genesis and only see failure, but the larger arc is about restoration. God doesn't abandon humanity after Eden, He pursues, He calls, He redeems. That same pattern still plays out today. Each of us has areas of brokenness, relationships we wish we could mend, choices we wish we could undo. The good news is that God specializes in restoration. The cosmic story of Eden lost and Eden restored is mirrored in the personal story of every person who chooses to step back into relationship with God. This means the story is more than history, it's an invitation. It's asking, will you participate? Will you live as if your life matters? Will you reflect God's image not just in belief, but in action? That might look like simple things: caring for a neighbor, forgiving someone who hurt you, choosing integrity when no one is watching. Those moments are small, but they're also sacred. They're glimpses of Eden breaking through into everyday life. Ultimately, the theological truth that every person bears God's image becomes personal when you see yourself as part of the restoration project. You are not just a spectator in the story, you are a character in it, invited to play a role. And when you accept that role, when you choose to love, to create, to heal, to serve, you're doing exactly what Adam was called to do from the beginning. Eden may feel far away, but the mission of Eden is right here, right now. It's in your hands, in your choices, and in your heart. 8. Conclusion: an invitation into the cosmic story. The story we've walked through, from Eden to Cain, from priesthood to purpose, might feel ancient, even otherworldly. It's filled with temples, gardens, divine covenants, and mysterious moments that seem far removed from everyday life. And yet, at its heart, this is not simply a story about the past. It's a story about right now, about you, and about what kind of future we will create together. The so-called forbidden history of humanity's beginning challenges us to look beyond simple timelines and scientific debates. It invites us to see life itself as sacred, to see humanity not as an accident but as a people with purpose, chosen to carry God's image and participate in something bigger than ourselves. This is not a dusty legend to file away under mythology. It's a living story, still unfolding, one in which every person has a role to play. From the very beginning, humanity has stood at a crossroads between two paths: trust in God or reliance on our own power. Adam's choice in the garden was not just his own, it symbolized the choice every person faces: will we accept our place in God's story, or will we write our own narrative apart from Him? That question hasn't gone away. It echoes in every decision, in every relationship, in every ambition we pursue. And here's the profound truth: even when humanity strays, even when Eden's gates seem locked, God's invitation does not disappear. Again and again, throughout history, He calls humanity back to Himself. The biblical story is filled with moments of restoration, people returning to God, communities healing, nations turning from chaos to peace. Ultimately, Jesus steps into the story as the last Adam, reopening the path that was lost, not just for one person or one family, but for the entire world. But this isn't just about theology, it's about life right now. We are living in a time of extraordinary change, technological breakthroughs, scientific discoveries, global connectivity unlike anything previous generations could imagine. Yet for all our progress, the same fundamental questions remain: who are we? Why are we here? Where is all this going? These questions reveal something deep within us, a memory of Eden, a longing for wholeness and purpose. The cosmic story of creation, fall, and restoration offers an answer. We are image bearers, made for relationship with God, invited to participate in His mission to heal and renew the world. That's not just poetry, it's a calling. It means that no matter who you are or where you come from, you have a role in something eternal. It means your choices matter. Your creativity matters. Your love, your forgiveness, your acts of kindness, they are not small things, they are glimpses of Eden breaking through into a broken world. Imagine for a moment if we all lived like that was true. Imagine homes where forgiveness replaces resentment, workplaces where integrity outweighs greed, communities where differences don't divide but enrich. Imagine technology used not to isolate us, but to connect and uplift. Imagine if every person embraced their role in the cosmic story, treating every life as sacred and every day as an opportunity to bring a little more light into the world. That might sound idealistic, but the story of Scripture insists it's possible. It tells us that the future of humanity isn't set in stone, it's still being written. And you are holding the pen. The question isn't just what happened at the beginning of time, but what you will do with the time you have now. Will you see yourself as an accident of history, or as someone called to reflect divine love and purpose? Will you watch life happen, Or will you step into the story as a co-creator, a restorer, a bearer of hope? This is the invitation hidden inside the so-called forbidden history, to see your life as sacred and significant, no matter how ordinary it might seem. To see every act of compassion, every moment of honesty, every choice to build rather than destroy as part of something cosmic, something eternal. The same God who walked with Adam in the garden, who called Cain to account, who restored humanity through Jesus, is still calling today, to you, to me, to all of us. And so, as we close this journey through humanity's beginnings, we are left with one simple but life-changing truth: the story is not over. Eden may have been lost, but its mission, to live in harmony with God, to care for creation, to love one another, is still alive. The invitation is open, and the future is waiting to be written. The question now is, will you take your place in that story? 9. Evidence from archaeology, genetics, and ancient texts. When most people think about the story of humanity's beginning, their minds often go to a garden, two people, and a choice that changed everything. But history, hidden in layers of soil, carved in stone, and whispered through ancient texts, paints a picture that is far more complex and mysterious than we might expect. If we listen closely to what archaeology, genetics, and ancient literature tell us, we begin to see something fascinating. Humanity may have always carried memories of a golden age, a time of sacred connection between heaven and earth, now long forgotten. Take, for example, Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. This site, uncovered only a few decades ago, has stunned archaeologists around the world. Built over 11,000 years ago, it features massive stone pillars arranged in intricate circles, covered with carvings of animals and abstract symbols. The sheer scale of the site challenges our understanding of early humans. How could people who were supposedly still hunter-gatherers create something so sophisticated? There were no farms, no established cities, yet here stood a temple-like structure that required careful planning, advanced knowledge of engineering, and a coordinated workforce. Göbekli Tepe suggests that humanity's spiritual imagination was alive and thriving long before what we usually call civilization. These people didn't just survive, they worshipped, they dreamed, they built monuments to something greater than themselves. It's as if there was already an ancient memory of a sacred space, a memory that echoes the biblical description of Eden as a temple garden where heaven and earth met. Genetics adds another layer to this picture. Modern studies of human DNA show that humanity does not trace back to a single isolated couple but to a population of thousands. In other words, our ancestry is far more complex and interconnected than we once believed. This doesn't necessarily contradict the biblical story, in fact, it complements it. If Genesis is telling us about a chosen representative, Adam, called into a special covenant relationship with God, then the presence of other human populations outside the garden makes perfect sense. The science of genetics reminds us that humanity was always widespread, diverse, and interconnected, yet somehow still linked by a shared story of purpose and longing. Then there are the ancient texts, stories preserved by cultures far removed from the Hebrew writers of Genesis, yet strangely similar. The Sumerians, one of the world's earliest known civilizations, wrote of a time when gods and humans lived closely together, when there was no sickness or death, and when wisdom flowed freely. The Greeks told of a golden age, an idyllic era of peace and harmony before humanity's decline. Ancient Egypt spoke of a time when the gods walked among humans, establishing order and teaching knowledge before withdrawing. Even in the Hindu tradition, there are cycles of ages, with earlier times marked by spiritual harmony and later ages marked by corruption and decay. What do we make of these recurring themes? Are they simply myths, invented separately by different cultures? Or could they be fragments of a shared memory, a collective echo of an early period when humanity experienced something extraordinary, something sacred? It's as if every culture carries a faint memory of its own Eden, a time when life was fuller, purer, and closer to the divine. These parallels don't prove the biblical story in a scientific sense, but they do something equally important. They show us that humanity has always wrestled with the same questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? Why did things go wrong? And is there a way back? Whether carved into stone tablets, told around firesides, or recorded in sacred scriptures, these questions are universal. They hint at a deep longing for something humanity feels it has lost, and at the same time, I hope that it might someday be restored. Even our modern fascination with ancient mysteries, from lost civilizations like Atlantis to the possibility of advanced prehistoric knowledge, reflects this yearning. We look at the precision of the pyramids, the astronomical alignments of Stonehenge, the forgotten cities in the Amazon rainforest, and we wonder, have we underestimated the people who came before us? Did they know something we've forgotten? Were they closer to something sacred that we can barely comprehend today? This is where the Bible story offers a unique perspective. It doesn't just tell us that there was a golden age, it tells us why it ended and what can be done about it. It tells us that humanity's separation from God was not just historical but personal, and that restoration is possible, not through rebuilding temples of stone but through renewing the temple of the human heart. The archaeology, the genetics, the ancient texts, they are all pieces of a puzzle. Together, they invite us to look at the Genesis story not as a simplistic record of two people in isolation, but as a symbolic and theological account of humanity's purpose and failure, of its longing and its hope. They invite us to see Adam not as the sole biological ancestor of humanity but as the representative chosen to enter into covenant with God, whose choices symbolize the choices all of us would one day face. What's striking is how consistent this longing has been across time and culture. From the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe to the poetic lines of Homer, from Egyptian hieroglyphs to Hindu scriptures, humanity keeps remembering and retelling the same kinds of stories. Perhaps that's not an accident. Perhaps deep down, we know we were made for more. And so, as we examine the evidence, both scientific and historical, we find ourselves circling back to the same truth the Bible has been saying all along, that humanity has always had a sense of calling, of sacred connection, and of tragic loss. But it also points to hope, the possibility of renewal, of rediscovering what was lost, of stepping back into the divine story that began before time itself. The question is whether we will treat these clues, these echoes from the past, as mere curiosities, or whether we will let them move us to action. Will we continue to chase mysteries as entertainment, or will we hear in them an ancient invitation, to live differently, to seek the sacred, and to step into the role humanity was always meant to play? 10. A parallel perspective, science and theology in conversation. For centuries, people have been told that they must choose, either stand with faith or stand with science, but never both. It's a false choice that has divided classrooms, churches, and dinner tables for generations. Yet when we look closely, really closely, we see that science and theology are not enemies, but partners in an ancient and ongoing conversation about truth. And perhaps, in this story of humanity's origins, the two perspectives are not as far apart as we've been led to believe. Science offers a breathtaking view of the universe and our place in it. Through telescopes, we peer into the birth of galaxies billions of light years away. Through microscopes, we glimpse the intricate machinery of life at the cellular level. Through genetics, we trace our biological heritage back thousands of generations, discovering how interconnected and diverse humanity truly is. These are astonishing achievements, proof of our relentless curiosity and creativity. Science gives us details, the age of the Earth, the branching patterns of evolution, the complexity of DNA. It answers the question of how with incredible precision. Theology, on the other hand, asks a different kind of question. Why? Why are we here? Why do we feel a moral pull toward justice and compassion? Why does beauty move us and loss break us? Theology is not concerned with the mechanism of life but with its meaning. It reminds us that we are more than chemistry and chance, that we carry within us something eternal, what Genesis calls the image of God. The supposed conflict between these two realms often arises because they are answering different questions. Science describes the processes of creation, theology speaks to the purpose behind creation. One measures the universe, the other gives it meaning. And yet, for much of history, humanity has thrived when these perspectives work together. Many of history's greatest scientists, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Mendel, were people of deep faith who saw their work not as a threat to God but as an exploration of His handiwork. This video takes that same spirit, the willingness to let science and theology share the same table. When we examine humanity's beginnings, science tells us of populations, migrations, and genetic diversity. It speaks of ancient hominids, of long evolutionary arcs, of interconnected tribes spreading across the earth. Theology tells us of Adam, of a divine calling, of a broken covenant that affected the entire cosmos. One deals in data, the other in destiny, but together they create a fuller picture. Take, for example, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe and other early monumental sites. Science marvels at the engineering skill, the social organization, the astronomical alignments. Theology sees in these ancient temples a longing for the sacred, a human drive to reach beyond the physical world and connect with something higher. One explains how humans built such places, the other asks why they felt compelled to build them at all. Or consider genetics. Science reveals a complex family tree, one that cannot be traced back to just two individuals but to a broader population. Theology doesn't need to argue with that data. Instead, it reframes Adam and Eve not as mere biological firsts but as representatives chosen to embody a spiritual covenant. Where science sees populations, theology sees calling. These perspectives don't cancel each other, they complement each other. The same harmony applies to modern questions of purpose. Science can tell us how neurons fire when we feel love, or how endorphins work when we experience joy, but it cannot tell us why love and joy matter. Theology answers that why, because we are made for relationship, because life is more than survival, because there is an eternal dimension to every act of kindness and creativity. In short, science can describe the notes of life's symphony, but theology explains why the music moves us. This blending of perspectives does more than expand knowledge, it transforms how we live. It teaches humility. Science reminds theology to stay grounded, to test its claims and respect evidence. Theology reminds science that facts without meaning can leave humanity adrift, that data alone cannot answer the deepest human questions. Together, they invite us to see life not as a conflict but as a collaboration between discovery and devotion. The story of humanity's beginning is therefore not an either/or proposition but a both/an opportunity. It is about seeing the human experience in full color, with all its mystery and meaning intact. And it encourages us to keep asking questions, not to destroy faith, nor to dismiss science, but to let each push the other toward deeper truth. When we adopt this approach, something amazing happens. We stop arguing over who's right and start asking what we can learn from one another. We see Adam's story not as an obstacle to science but as a lens through which to interpret our unique calling as humans. We see scientific discoveries not as threats to faith but as glimpses into the wonder of creation, each new insight like a verse in an ever-expanding hymn. In the end, this is not about choosing between lab coats and prayer books. It's about embracing both, about standing in awe at a universe that is both scientifically intricate and spiritually profound. It's about seeing the hand of God not just in sacred texts, but in the double helix of DNA, the dance of electrons, and the arc of galaxies across the night sky. Science tells us where we've come from in space and time. Theology tells us why we matter within that vastness. Together, they remind us that we are not accidents, we are participants in a grand, cosmic story, one that is still unfolding and still inviting us to take our place. 11. Cultural diversity and humanity's collective memory. If there is one thing that unites humanity, it is our stories. Across deserts, forests, islands, and mountains, people have always told stories about who we are, where we came from, and why the world is the way it is. And when we look closely, we notice something remarkable. Despite vast cultural differences, many of these stories share a strikingly similar pattern, a golden age of harmony, a moment of loss or failure, and a lingering hope for restoration. The story of Adam and Eve is one expression of this pattern, deeply rooted in the Hebrew and Christian tradition. It gives us a garden, a divine relationship, a tragic choice, and a world forever changed. Yet if we travel far beyond the borders of ancient Israel and explore the myths and memories of other peoples, we discover echoes of the same story, told in different tongues and symbols. Take the Sumerians, for example, one of the earliest known civilizations. They told of a time when gods and humans lived side by side, when there was no sickness or death, and when wisdom flowed freely. This harmony ended when humans defied divine boundaries, resulting in toil and suffering. The Greeks spoke of a golden age ruled by Chronos, a time of peace and plenty, which gave way to the lesser silver and iron ages as human virtue declined. In Hindu tradition, the world moves through cycles called yugas, beginning with a pure and righteous age before descending into moral chaos. Even in the mythology of indigenous peoples, from the Hopi of North America to the Maori of New Zealand, there are stories of an original order, a sacred harmony that was somehow broken. What do these parallels mean? One possibility is that different cultures independently imagine similar stories because they face similar struggles: the mystery of mortality, the pain of injustice, the longing for meaning. Another possibility is more profound, that these are fragments of a shared human memory, an echo of something real and foundational, what theologians might call the collective memory of Eden. Psychologists and historians have long studied how collective memory shapes communities. Nations remember their founding moments, families remember their ancestors, cultures remember their heroes and tragedies. Could humanity as a whole carry a deeper memory, one not stored in monuments or books, but etched into the human soul? Perhaps that is why so many cultures speak of a time of perfection and peace followed by a great fall. It's as though deep inside, we know something precious was lost, and we yearn to find it again. The diversity of these myths actually strengthens the case for a shared root. If all of them came from one source culture, we might dismiss them as mere borrowing. But when civilizations separated by oceans and centuries tell similar stories, we are forced to ask, why? Why would ancient Chinese poets, Norse storytellers, African griots, and Middle Eastern scribes all wrestle with the same themes: innocence, disobedience, loss, and hope? This doesn't mean every detail lines up perfectly with Genesis. These stories vary in characters, settings, and outcomes. Some imagine a literal paradise lost, others focus on cosmic battles or broken covenants with the gods. Yet the emotional core is the same. Humanity once enjoyed harmony, then broke it, and now longs to restore it. That longing is so universal that even modern literature and film reflect it. Think of stories about utopias, dystopias, and quests to recover a better world. Whether it's Tolkien's Middle-earth, Pixar's Wall-E, or countless science fiction epics, the same deep narrative beats resonate: paradise lost, paradise sought. What's even more striking is how these collective memories often carry moral lessons. They don't just tell us something went wrong, they tell us it went wrong because of choices, pride, greed, rebellion, or neglect. In other words, these myths don't simply mourn a cosmic accident, they diagnose a moral failure. That is precisely what Genesis does, too. Adam and Eve's story isn't just about one mistake, it's about every mistake, about humanity's tendency to choose autonomy over trust, to grasp for control rather than receive life as a gift. And just as these stories agree on loss, they also agree on longing. Whether it is the promise of a new golden age, a coming savior, or a cycle of rebirth, cultures seem hardwired to hope for restoration. This universal desire for redemption suggests something profound. Perhaps we are not simply products of random evolution with a love of storytelling, but beings who intuitively sense a greater purpose, beings who feel, even if dimly, that there is something beyond what we see now. For Christians, this resonates with the biblical narrative that moves from Eden lost to Eden restored, from Adam to Christ, from exile to reconciliation. But even outside Christian belief, the persistence of this pattern invites reflection. Why do we all carry this same ache for something better, something whole? Why do we tell ourselves over and over again that there was once a time of peace, that we lost it, and that it can be regained? Could it be because we are remembering something true? The diversity of cultural myths doesn't dilute the story of Adam and Eve, it amplifies it. It shows us that humanity, regardless of geography or belief, has always been haunted by the same questions and inspired by the same hope. We are different in language, in customs, in worship, but we share a collective memory and, perhaps, a collective destiny. And maybe that's the point. The story of Adam and Eve isn't just about one faith tradition, it's a mirror held up to the entire human race, reminding us that we were made for harmony, that we lost it, and that we still crave its return. It tells us that restoration isn't just a personal matter, it's universal. It involves all cultures, all people, all of us reaching back towards something we know in our hearts we were meant to have: peace with each other, with creation, and with the divine. And that's where our journey into forbidden medieval secrets comes to an end. For now, what we've uncovered tonight is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle about humanity's hidden past. If you enjoyed exploring these mysteries and want to discover even more untold stories that blend history, faith, and a touch of wonder, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community here at Thunga Storytime. Don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend who loves a good mystery, and leave a comment about what you think really happened at the dawn of humanity. Until next time, rest well, dream deep, and keep searching for the truth.